So my name is Shabnam, on behalf of the Elahé Omidyar Institute of Iranian Studies. It's my absolute pleasure to welcome Ida to this session and to welcome all of you. On behalf of Dr. Tawakoli too, he's a little bit delayed. He'll join us a little bit later. I'm just going to read the land acknowledgement, and Arzu Jan and Ida Jan will take it on after that. We wish to acknowledge this land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and most recently the Mississaugas of the Credit River. Today, this meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. And with that, I will pass it on to Dr. Azad to introduce Ida, and then we move on from there.
Thank you so much, Shabna and John. Thank you, everybody who is arriving. And it's lovely to see so many familiar faces, many faces of colleagues who are back again or who haven't been with us before. It's lovely to have you all with us. So I will briefly introduce our speaker today. And then during the course of her presentation, Professor Tawakoli Tari should be able to join us. And then afterwards, we will have a Q&A as usual, where you are all very welcome, by the way, in the meantime, to use the chat box and write anything that comes to mind. Just type it in, lest you forget by the end of the talk. So gives me great pleasure to introduce Ida Meftahi to you, who will be talking today about, her title is In Search of Urban Geopolitics, Deep Mapping Tehran's Lalehzar District, 1880 to 1960. So Ida Meftahi is assistant professor of Middle Eastern history at Boise State University, where she teaches a range of interdisciplinary courses on Middle Eastern and Iranian history and culture. She holds a PhD from the University of Toronto's Department of Near and Middle Eastern Civilizations. She's been a postdoctoral fellow at the Institute for the Arts and Humanities at Pennsylvania State University from 2013 to 2014, as well as visiting professor of contemporary Iranian culture and society at the University of Maryland from 2014 to 2019. Ida specializes in the history of modern Iran, emphasizing the intersections of politics, gender, and performance. And she has presented and published her work in a number of academic fora in different areas of the humanities and social sciences in North America, Europe, and the Middle East. Her first book, Gender and Dance in Modern Iran, Biopolitics on Stage, in 2016, received the Association for Iranian Studies prestigious Latife Yarshater Award for its original contribution to the field of Iranian women's studies. Meftahi's work has emerged as a frequent reference for recent academic inquiries into urban Iranian cultural history, ethnomusicology and gender studies, cinema, theater, and dance. So without further ado, Professor Meftahi, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much for this introduction. I'm really happy to be here to present my most recent book, project. It's a digital project that's going to be used also for my book. I'm just going to start. I have to also mention that I'm having some serious started like having some rashes and stuff, so I haven't gone to the doctor because I have to finish this paper, so I might be slow. Since 2017, I've started an archival project on Tehran's Lalehzar district. I'm sorry, I forgot to share the screen. So I've started an archival project on Tehran's Lalehzar district. encompassing and its vicinity, encompassing about 3 square kilometers. I collectively dubbed this area of Tehran, Tulip Tehran. As you can view on this map, my research is basically my spatial lens in this research is focused on the area between the United States Embassy to the north, the Soviet and British Embassy to the left, to the west, the Iranian Parliament to the east, and Sepak Square or Tufane to the south. Therefore, not only the Lalehzar street with its once cinemas, theaters, cafes, and cabarets is the focus of my archival search, but I also investigate documents pertaining to multitudes of governmental buildings, major foreign embassies, diplomatic ventures, and missionary schools, as well as number of chapels and mosques. That strategic geographical position boosted Lalehzar and its cultural sphere to become part of a larger urban network that was impacted not only by economics but also by international relations. I argue that the street was indeed part of a multi-layered global urban network. So a close spatial analysis of Lalehzar therefore requires a multi-dimensional and international archival search on its multiple urban, religious, business, diplomatic, and artistic. Building a collection as such with the prospect of forming multitudes of fresh historical narratives on modern Iran, it really have so many aspects that one can pursue. Basically, it poses its own challenge because of this diversity of the data that I'm collecting. Aside from the regular complications of accessing certain archives, the wider scope of my search for a microarchival project requires extensive hours of processing, sorting, indexing, and analyzing. Well, metadata specifically designed for the purpose, it considers the basically sort of the geographical of the incidents and events and basically embassies, all other institutions. With the help of my assistants in Iran, I now can use an index to locate a document from among the several thousand retrieved from various Iranian archives, processing an enormous body of unindexed material, including the historical press material, records of oral history and non-Persian, is also very time-consuming. But allow me to switch to the exciting part of this research, that is to deploy the archive on the strategic area of Tehran for carving a localized and yet geopolitically informed narrative of events and everyday life during World War II. Sorry. It was the February of 1940. The British diplomatic mission at their legation here on the were anxiously watching how the World War II would play out in Iran. Concerned about their oil fields in the south, they were deliberating on the precautionary measures against possible threats from their rivals, Germany and Russia. The German-Soviet non-aggression pact, the similarities between their diplomacy within Iran, and the pressures from the Anglo-Soviet agreement of 1907 made it difficult for the British to predict how and when to react in the event that Russia and Germany would join forces to lay siege. These British representatives in Tulip Grove, the German threat was quite visceral. German legation, with its Nazi-style architecture, was right across the street along with the Brown House for propaganda. Indeed, the British diplomats were surrounded by everything German, from companies and businesses and abandoned cars, movie theaters where the German films, as well as overt sites of espionage in the area, including 2 Nazi barbershops. To the British, German propaganda signs World War I, but now the listeners could also tune in to Persian broadcasts from Radio Berlin. Furthermore, Germany was not only perceived by Iranians as a third power counterbalancing the Anglo-Soviet rivalry, but was also represented by its professionals and experts employed at Iranian industrial projects. From before, the British intelligence in Tehran had warned about a German for a potential coup against the increasingly unpopular
Ayrajan.
Reza Shah.
Dr. Meftahi, Ayrajan, sorry, your voice is a little bit choppy for everybody. May I suggest turning off your camera? Maybe the voice gets a little bit better. My apologies. I didn't want to cut you off. Thank you. Just a stop video at the bottom.
I can do that, Shabna. Okay.
Just a stop video would do. Thank you. I hope so. Yes, we'll let you know. Thank you. Okay, so when Germany declared war on the Soviet Union, the British became even more anxious when received the news that the German minister had passed Hitler's letter to Reza Shah, offering protection to Iran in exchange for joining the Axis. Another alarming news was the secret meeting of the German minister with the large German community of Tehran at the Brown House, alerting them for an upcoming mission, asking them not to mingle with German Jews or other foreign residents in the cities. Added to these were the celebrations of German victories at the Eastern Front by groups of Iranians right on the nearby Sepah Square. In September 1941, it wasn't long after the German invasion of the Soviet Union that the newly allied British and Soviets invaded Iran, dividing it into a northern Soviet territory, a southern British territory, while the center, including Tehran, remained neutral. Yet the Allied airplanes flew over the city while Russian army tanks covered its streets. Reza Shah was removed and soon was replaced by his young son, Mohammad Reza Shah, signing the Treaty of Alliance on January 29, 1942. Iran agreed to the military presence of the British and Soviet forces only for the purpose
of transferring supplies from the south to the north to support the Eastern Front. The tripartite treaty specified that Iran was not under occupation and that its territorial integrity, sovereignty, and political independence must be respected. Article 4 of the treaty also obliged Britain and Soviets to each reach a separate agreement with Iranian authorities, assure the minimal disturbance to Iranian economy, administration, and security forces, the normal movements of Iranian population, and uphold the application of Iranian laws and regulations during the wartime. The situation became further complicated as with the entrance of the United States to the war, the American troops entered Iran under the auspices of the British Army, not the initial claim for American presence was to only assist with the supply transmission. American involvement in Iran also increased with Iranian government's recruitments of several American experts, including Arthur Millspaugh, who set up in his office at the old Grand Hotel building around Lalehzar Street. In the meantime, the American politicians in Washington came to view Iran as a testing ground for the success of the Atlantic Charter, which was still fresh. For this, the United States had to play the role of a third power, like the German, counterbalancing the British and Russian power game, and prevent any threats against the integrity and economic situation of Iran during and after the war. Following up with the treaty, legations, including those of Italy, Hungary, and Austria, were to be shut down, while their citizens were to be expelled immediately. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs collaborated with the Axis governments to locate their diplomats and citizens and arrange for their transfer through the northern or southern fronts. In Tehran, these transfers were often arranged in front of Axis embassies in Tulip Grove. Sweden became the protecting power of Germany. The German legation was closed and its Brown House was confiscated to be converted to the British Victory House. A new commission began operating at the Ministry of Finance for protection of the properties of Axis powers and their citizens. The location of that office was also on Ferdowsi Avenue. Yet at the middle of Tehran, the German legation was vandalized by Soviet and British soldiers on the midnight of January 24th, 1942. While the Swedish embassy pressed the Iranian authorities to provide further security, the Iranian Ministry of Interior asked the British legation for better controlling of their behavior in public. Nevertheless, Allied troops not only presented a range of misbehaviors, but were frequently caught in various levels of felony. These ranged from free-use, damage of public property, physical assaults on Iranian citizens and police forces, to sexual assaults and and murder. This situation brought various levels of Iranian governance, including the city police, the municipality, the Ministry of Justice, state, ministries of justice, state, as well as and war, as well as the prime minister himself on board to protect the citizens' right to the only channel available to them, the Allied legation. But soon they realized that these legations' missions were first and foremost to serve their own respective countries' wartime interests, rather than committing to the Treaty of Alliance, Article 4. In the hundreds of pages of correspondences between the Iranian Ministry of Foreign Affairs with Allied diplomatic representations on the matter, what came to be the underlying theme was indeed capitulations, which was abolished a few years back in Iran. Emphasizing that Iran was not an occupied country, the Iranian authorities repeatedly argued that the legal and juristic handling of the criminal cases conducted by Allied personnel was only to be done in the Iranian courts. Any attempts as such on the part of the Allies was an intervention in the country's internal affairs and against the sovereignty of its governance. But dealing with military car accidents showed the first instances of this conflict between Iranian government and the Allies. As Iran was a military route merely used for transportation of supplies via railway or roads, the country saw an upon vehicles, including cars and trucks. In about a month after the occupation of Iran, not only local pedestrians walking in Tehran could observe the transportation of supplies by military cars and trucks, but were regularly hit by them, resulting in various levels of injuries to deaths. Mid-1941 alone, there were reports of more than 8 accidents in Lalehzar area involving Soviet cars, while in some cases the drivers were released without signing an interrogation paper due to the lack of literacy in Persian. The Iranian government pursued 4 of the individual cases with Russian embassy that in response denied lack of any blunder by the drivers. Needless to say, the number of car accidents involving Red Army was much further in the Soviet-controlled northern zone, handling which was done with more liberty on the part of the Soviets. In order to control, in some cases, the Soviets held military trials, which sentenced the driver imprisonment. The British also had neither a clear idea of the limits of their power, nor an interest in handling military accidents through diplomatic channels. A year after the invasion, and in response to the increasing number of unresolved cases by the British vehicles in Tehran, 8 of which pertain to Tulip Grove, the Iranian Prime Minister pressed the Allied representatives to take serious actions. This led to the appointment of claims officer by the British legation for Tehran area the duty of which was investigating all claims for compensation of any kind and informing Iranian authorities of the nature of any disciplinary action taken against drivers of military vehicles involved in car accidents. With a pushback from Iranian Minister of War, who interpreted this a British attempt for imposing capitulation, it was finally decided to enforce identification cards for Allied drivers to be obtained from Tehran police. Additionally, Allied soldiers frequently engaged in erratic robberies and with no previous planning. Among many instances in Tulip Grove area is the case of two British armed members taking store on Quant intersection and their subsequent knifing of the store owner's forehead. But dealing with World War II's impact on is deeper than dealing with foreigners' felonies. The country was struggling with war-related famine, especially in the neutral zone. The Iranian public laid the blame largely on the British, and the British traced back the blame to the Soviets, who controlled the northern territories, the main food provider of the country. In December 1942, only a month after the arrival of Mill's mission, riots broke and spread out from the parliament to Naderi and Lalehzar, and Istanbul streets. During the riots, shops were looted, their windows were broken, and consequently, the foreign troops were instructed not to appear in public. In a clash, the city police and the Iranian military reportedly fired blank, though there were several casualties and one death. Gradually, the Allied troops' behavior, excessive drinking, unruliness, sexual misconduct, and the sense of superiority and lack of respect for the locals also became a source of panic in Tehran. A highly visible community in Tulip Grove, Allied military personnel presented the image of drunken foreigners as they stayed up in hotels, roamed the streets, gathered in bars, and crowded in restaurants and cinemas, and danced in cafes along with the modernized Tehran residents. Gradually, the sexual behavior of the troops became a cause of tension and physical clash in the society, and the subject of heated debate in the press. Looking for women at every corner of the town, Allied troops sexually harassed women on the street, visited brothels, and got into fights with other men over women. In one case, 3 British officers broke the head of an Iranian horse rider who did not provide them with women. In majority of cases, including the above-mentioned one, which again happened around Lalehzar Street, the injured locals were taken to a health clinic, while the foreign assailant left the scene without any traces of their identification. Detecting the British from members also seemed to have been built for the locals, which at times resulted in their diplomatic representatives blaming one another and denied involvement of their respective military members. Seemingly, the Soviets managed to resolve the issue by executing one of their unruly officers to prevent others from such actions. Aiming to take control of the situation and in response to the British and American soldiers' destructive manners, that in June 1942, that the station standing of the British Army issued an order to its personnel in Tehran, instructing on manners of saluting, dressing, and interacting with Iranians, while declaring drunkenness a court-martial offense in the Middle East. Certain sites, including Tehran's red light district and the Polish refugee camp, except while on duty or by invitation, were considered out of bounds, while a number of venues in tulip groves were specifically noted as acceptable destinations for the troops, suggesting that arrangements were made between these businesses and the city police regarding their time of closure and serving of alcohol. The order also strictly forbids the concealment of venereal diseases, while threatening those diagnosed as physically compromised due to venereal disease or alcoholism to forfeit their proficiency pay, bringing another alarming fact to the foreground: handling the sexual appetite of the troops in a country with a different social and religious order. Yet the conduct and interaction of the Allied troops with Iranian society had already become an unpredicted means of face-to-face representation of their countries that damaged their reputation and hindered the prospect of their post-war interests. This was also counterintuitive to their heavy investment in propaganda activities and their rivalries over the persuasion of Iranian public opinion. Having full knowledge of their unfavorable image, the British activities were delivered by its two main arms, operated from the Victory House, the Public Relations Bureau belonged to the Ministry of Information, which conducted overt war propaganda activities from the Victory House, including newsreels, news segment broadcasts produced by Miss Lampton from Radio Tehran. The British Council, which was active in Iran since 1935, had a different strategy. It was rather tacit and was to replace the old image of British imperialism, the democratic one, through cultural activities. Despite these efforts, the Soviets were far ahead in garnering influence, especially with the foundation of the party and recruitment of Iranian literary and artistic figures of the time. Soviet sympathy promulgated in cultural venues such as to the Zoot Club and the theatrical stage in the Tulip Grove, Tehran. It also appealed to a large public by organizing demonstrations that could mobilize up to 12,000. They particularly had well-organized, well-choreographed demonstrations throughout planned to be, in a way, performed throughout the tulip grove area. The United States' most important cultural project pertaining to tulip grove included infiltrating the Office of Theater and Cinema at the Iranian Ministry of Interior's office through Nila Kramkuk. The Iranian cultural attaché served as the head of censorship office until the end of war. Having the highest position in the Iranian public opinion, the most important American propaganda scheme was to keep a distance from the British, both for their historic imperialist image and for the outrageous misdemeanors of their troops. But gradually, the concerns over American soldiers' behaviors in Tehran increased as they were mostly settled in various hotels, including those in Tulip Grove area. So more American servicemen ushered in Tehran as part of the Persian Gulf Command. Directed by General Connolly. Reaching 28,000 by 1943, they outnumbered the British, Soviet, and Polish in total. With more American personnel in Tehran, working for the Persian Gulf Command Office, the concerns and complaints over their misconducts and felonies overshadowed those of the...
Ida?
Jana.
I'm sorry, the sound is very choppy from your side. We're wondering if you've turned off your video. Is there anything else that you could do?
Do you want me to connect with my headphone?
I don't think it's that. I think it's probably your internet connection. It's okay. I guess we can't improve it beyond this. Just so you know.
Is it too bad?
It's quite choppy sometimes, just so you know. I'm sorry.
So unfortunately,
there's nothing more. Okay.
It's hard to predict. Yeah.
Someone is saying, can you connect with a cell phone? I don't know. Sorry.
Yeah, try to
or using cellular data?
I'll do that.
We can try. We probably need to.
Yes, for now it's better. If you want to continue, hopefully it will stay this way.
Okay. So more American servicemen. Oh, sorry. I'm just going to go back to where I. Okay. So with more American personnel in Tehran working for the PGC office, the concern and complaints over their misconducts and felonies overshadowed those of the British and Soviet troops. As United States was not officially part of the treaty, the presence of the troops in such massive scale was deemed despicably illegal. Even if they were operating under the British flag, they at least had to sign an individual agreement pertaining to Article 4 of the treaty. This brought the Prime Minister, the Majlis, as well as a range of other levels of Iranian media on board to heavily criticize the situation and to press the American legation in Tehran for an agreement. Shabnam, is it better?
It's a little bit better.
Shall I continue?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. So between March and 3, the American minister, Louis Dreyfus, actively communicated with the State Department about the ongoing decline of American prestige for an immediate action on the status of the agreement. He also pleaded the State Department to engage the War Department commander, here in this picture, General Connolly, accountable for his failures in controlling the troops, because of him neglecting the Iranian public opinion, and sort of his utilitarian view of Iranians. He was there, they were there to basically transfer the supplies and, what happened to the people did not matter to them. So in 1943, Dreyfus warned the State Department that the press campaign in Tehran has reached a state of violence unequaled anywhere else in the world. One of the most hostile editorial accounts attached to his report was by the newspaper Iranian, in which the author described his observations in Lalehzar streets. Several American soldiers were standing in a line and urinating. Others gambling knuckle bones with ruffians, while another was left with a Polish girl in a cafe without paying attention to decency. We all have seen at least one intoxicated American soldier who, with one glass of arak, swears to heaven and earth in their own as well as Persian language. Other things are taking place that can't be said here. Within a few weeks, Iranian published another piece about an American officer's attack on an Iranian man on Istanbul streets, merely because the victim was defending an Iranian lady. Another account by Erdam calls out on two incidents that happened on the corner of Istanbul and Lalehzar Street, both of which involved drunken American soldiers who physically attacked and injured Iranian civilians. The initial response to the warnings and demands of the Dreyfus was positive, as the troops were relocated to camps outside of Tehran. Yet this wasn't enough, as soon the sexual misconduct of the troops exceeded the levels of pinching and molestation to abduction and even rape. The case of a 10-year-old girl, Ozra, who lost her virginity by an American soldier in the entryway of the newspaper office of Sedai Iran in Tulip Grove, is an instance of this dire situation. The issue gradually became a national concern. If the honor of Iranian women can't be protected in the very capital, what happens on the rest of the country? With mounting criticisms of Dreyfus towards Connolly, in the late 1943, the War Department lashed out at the State Department, demanding dismissal of Dreyfus on the claim of his problematic personality and actions against the American interests. This work was perhaps a precursor to the shifts in American policy, particularly in the wake of the Tehran conference. Also happening in Tulip Grove, the meeting of the Big Three came to the knowledge of Iranian authorities only a few days before the event. Initially, at the British legation, due to security measures and rumors of a German plot for assassination of Churchill by the German spy, the conference location was moved to the Russian legation. Among the highlights of the conference were the ceremony of Joseph Stalin receiving the sword of Stalingrad from Churchill and the celebration of Churchill's birthday. Kept silent from the public and media, the conference itself was a feast, while many ordinary Iranians. The departure of the Big Three was also ceremonial. The declaration was publicized in the media, and within a few days, the three streets in Tulip Grove area were renamed to reflect the names of Allied leaders, Churchill, Stalin, and Roosevelt. This was followed by the elevation of the diplomatic representation of Britain and United States from legations to embassies. With Dreyfus gone, the new representatives seemed to be more cooperative with General Connolly, as well as the revised active American policy drafted in 1944. In addition to the previous language of Iran being a testing ground for the Atlantic Charter, the new policy put an emphasis on the American post-war national interests with regard to Iran's strategic geopolitical location and the prospects of oil concessions, civil air bases, and increased commercial exchange. It is also noted that with this goal in mind, public opinion would not be of concern, as further involvement will present a more realistic image of United States to Iranians. But of ignoring the Iranian demands did not last long. Among others, the failure of American mission in Iran, the alleged sabotage of Soviet and British, increasing number of incidents involving the American made the Shah to convey this message to the British ambassador. I want everything American in this country. Furthermore, the attack of an American soldier to the elderly man, Hossein Barzaneh, in his own house brought the issue of agreement back to the center of public outrage. Etela'at ran an editorial entitled, "What an Intoxicated Soldier Does," which ends, if these actions were not properly handled, no one will be secured at their own home. After this massive controversy, the Russian official newspaper Izvestia asserted that the presence of American troops in Iran without authorization by treaty was an infringement of Iranian sovereignty. But were the Americans really looking for an agreement? Well, the answer is yes and no. While with the insistence of Dreyfus, the late State Department had drafted one, it was ultimately vetoed by the War Department on the basis of Connolly's logic. An agreement as such would only bring juristic and financial liability, and its claim that PGC, Persian Gulf Command, is operating under the auspices of the British Army. This attitude led to a rift on the British-American relations as well. Later on, in his top secret report to President Roosevelt, General Patrick Hurley also added another piece to this puzzle. Even in the State Department itself, there was a divide on reaching an agreement with Iran between those upholding the ideology of the United Nations and those with imperialistic and monopolistic visions who purposefully acted against the Atlantic Charter. In the remaining months of the war, it was the US Embassy in Tehran who complained against the Iranian hostile anti-American expressions and the riotous actions toward the army personnel in Tehran. Acts such as throwing camel dung, mud, and watermelon rind to army officials' cars, again around Sepah Square, or group attacks on American soldiers or drivers immediately after car accidents were some of the examples that happened in those areas. In response, the Prime Minister wrote back, "Instead of lamenting for yourselves, you should think of the victims harmed by your troops' careless actions, and make sure that those incidents would not happen again." In 1946, when the Soviet Union delayed the departure of its troops, mainly for backing the Democratic Party of Azerbaijan, the United States supported the Iranian cause at the United Nations, recovering its tarnished image in Iranian public opinion. But this didn't last long. With the 1953 Anglo-American assisted coup, the utilitarian imperialistic nature of the new American policy overshadowed its image for good. What is forgotten in the historical narratives, however, is the outcry of the Iranian encountering the occupiers, as well as the agency of Iranian authorities from the Majlis to various ministries, who, despite the internal and international pressures, still insisted on the Iranian sovereignty and the integrity of rights of its citizens. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Aidajan, if you can turn on your camera, please. I'll turn off the captions. Or maybe, where are the captions? Here. Okay, hide. Aida, can you start your video?
Yes.
Oh, there you are. Perfect. Thank you so much for this fascinating talk. I certainly learned a lot. I did have to step out for a few minutes to collect my daughter. So I'm going to open it up to our distinguished guests to please raise your hands virtually, and so we can unmute you and you can ask your question to our presenter. Yeah, there might also be questions of clarification because the sound was unfortunately coming and going a lot until the end. So may I invite our participants to raise your hands? If not, I will let you think about your questions. Meanwhile, I have quite a few. And I see Leila Purtavov has raised her hand, so I will pass the word to Leila in a second. But if I can also ask you, Aidarjan, if you could tell us a little bit, because this series is about documents and archives, if you could tell us a little bit about your sources that you've been working with, how have you approached, a bit about method, how have you approached your sources, about access to relevant archives? Are they virtual? Are they physical? So that would be very interesting to me.
Yes. So basically, the whole like the second phase of the project, which basically showcased the way that these archival materials could provide a completely different narrative through focusing on a specific part of Tehran through like archival materials. So I'm talking about pretty much writing a narrative mostly based on the range of material that I gathered. So as I mentioned at the beginning, it was basically I looked for diplomatic, artistic, cultural, business, pretty much a wide scope to be able to retrieve the information that can be weaved in my historical narrative that's focused on this area. So the data that I've gathered, unfortunately, virtual. So I had to, I extensively collected archival material, documents from various archives in Iran. The one that I mostly used here was the archive of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Iran, but I also have document retrieves from Majlis, the National Archive of Iran, even archive of Kayhan, Etelat, and so wide range pretty much from Iran. Then I've also collected and visited archives in United Kingdom. Part of the documents they used, especially at the beginning, was from there. I lived, I basically worked at the University of Maryland College Park. So the American National Archive was definitely one of the places that I visited and gathered information. But most of these are actually not, organized or indexed. So this means going through, volumes of material and finding, a wider, basically, collection of information that needs to be processed as well. So other archives, I've visited archive of Azerbaijan, Armenia, and Ottoman. And I'm looking forward to go to archives of France for different reasons, and hopefully Russia, but obviously the language barrier is also there. So did I answer your question?
Yeah, thank you. This reminds me quite a lot. I mean, I do much older history, medieval history, but it reminds me of Jennifer Jenkins's presentation for those who were there, and what she was saying about how the archives, and she was looking at German archives, diplomatic archives about relations with Iran, and how 1930s, I think it was, and 40s, and how, there was no proper catalog, and how she basically just went from box to box until she struck gold. So I was just curious to know whether is that sort of how you do it, like just wish for the best, and or is there more of a method to the madness?
I mean, for instance, I mean, the basically retrieving data from Iranian archives had its own challenges because reasons. For instance, Ministry of Foreign Affairs has information that's considered basically top secret. So, but I was able to basically access and work there for a couple of months. There, I mean, the data is actually much more indexed and organized, and you can get the data, the documents on a CD. This is the same for the Iranian National Archives and etc. But for the British Archive, again, the index is like old school, but still, usable. The American one is just basically volumes and volumes that of about different aspects of the diplomatic relation with Iran, economic relation, basically information on and correspondences on Tehran area, for instance. So I have to go through a lot of them to be able to retrieve documents that can connect me from a street in Tehran to the actual larger geopolitical relations. And I think World War II was the best testing ground for this whole project. But I have to say that although my book project is going to be in this area of Tehran between 1880s to 1960, I've been stuck with the World War II for a long time.
Thank you so much. I mean, I have many more questions, but I don't want to monopolize you. So, Lalehzar, please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Sorry. Thanks, Ida. It's so nice to see you and so nice to see this project develop. My question kind of is also archival, or about your archival process. So you did this beautiful job of bringing together cultural and diplomatic and political history together today. But also knowing your previous work and knowing you, I also know you do a lot of social history, and I know you've done some oral history stuff for this. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that and how you kind of will be drawing out the social history of the space and the performers, what kinds of work you've done around that. Because I also, from, again, your previous work, I know that's where some of your most creative stuff happens. So I'm excited to hear about
that. So from there, but I realized that it's because I'm talking of basically the cultural sphere of Lalehzar pretty much throughout my, study of the different like theatrical theaters dance between 900 to the revolution. I realized that it's impossible to consider this space as separate from what's happening around it. So there, for the French influence, for instance, was dominant at certain point. The Russian influence, all basically shaping the new Iranian cosmopolitan culture and performance, and also gender, basically performance. So this is basically how the project started, but the goal of the project is actually social history, because the narrative that I'm writing is about how people actually felt, basically international events happening in just basically in the streets. So most of the time these narratives are top down, but I'm trying to create a narrative that's about people, and it's about their visceral experience of events. So I'm talking about red riots, accidents, the response from people. I was able to present just a little bit of it, but the focus on social history is pretty much very dominant in the project.
Thank you. Any questions from the audience for Professor Meftahi? If not, I have another question. I was wondering, in terms of the Iranian archives, whether you experienced any difficulty with access to this kind of material. Is it considered, I don't know, in any way embarrassing, or what was your experience with that? Were you on site, on the ground, or are these digital files?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, they weren't digitized, but
sorry,
they were
I didn't
ended.
catch that.
So
could you repeat that? Sorry.
The Iranian, could you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes. So accessing documents in Iran was, could be challenging, because you need to basically create sort of trust, especially when you're going to places like the Ministry of Foreign Affairs archive, because they really do have sensitive information. And when you ask, for instance, about an incident listed and indexed, they digitize the material, provide them to you to only look at it in their own basically site. And so still you can't take this data out. And then after you select your material, it's going to go through sort of a review by, some authorities in the national. Nothing is sensitive, so it's quite a process. But part of the reason that I was able to retrieve, really thousands of documents from Iranian archives was the help of a dear friend, Dr. Ali Tatari, who was the head of the archives of the Majlis. Well, he was removed from his post, unfortunately, but he was really helpful and basically on my archival process.
Amazing. Yeah, it always comes down to those personal contacts, doesn't it? Or often, anyway. Fascinating. And what is this going to result in? Is this going to lead to a book, or what's your plan with this? Because it's such fascinating material.
Yes, it's about a book entitled Tulip Grove Tehran, Urban Geopolitics, Culture and Performance in Iran.
And where's it? Do you have a publisher yet, or?
No, I mean, I'm barely making the chapter one, the chapter that I've written on World War II into a publishable paper. So this presentation was also a push to basically finalize my narrative to some extent for publication.
Thank you. Well, yeah, early days, but we're looking forward to seeing this output. And I have Karen Pinto who would like to ask a question. Please unmute yourself.
Salam, Aida. It's wonderful to hear your work. I didn't know the exact area, but it's fascinating. And I have a very unusual question. So I am actually an indirect product of exactly what you are talking about. And I'm wondering if in looking at documents and archives, you sort of, I don't know, somehow contacting people like me. So my mother was Iranian, half Iranian and French. Grew up in Tehran, was born and raised in Tehran. And then met my father, who was part of the Allied forces from South Asia, and he was from India, and he was based in Iran. They drafted them, and there was, I forget the place, it's like northern Iran. You probably know the place where they were based, where they had that big battle. But anyway, so when you were talking about them coming down and the movies, and my mother was actually working at the movie theater, and I was just like reliving my life of my parents in this very weird way, because I've been very interested actually in tracking the whole thing. I would love to be in touch with you actually about this, because your history actually connects personally with me. So I'm actually wondering if you've thought about connecting with live, archives. Like, I guess I could be a live archive or something like that. I don't know if you understand what I mean, but my great-grandfather actually worked in the Citroen factory, and the Shah, I think it was Nasser, I forget which one, it was late, it was late 19th century. He made a trip to Iran, to France, and he visited the Citroen factory, and he decided he wanted a gold-plated car. And then when they got the car ready, they realized nobody knew how to drive at that point in Iran. So they asked for volunteers, and my great-grandfather volunteered, and he ended up there. So I have this weird history that was connecting personally to your talk. And I found your talk riveting and excellent. And I'm just wondering, and I just thought I would raise this with you, that I would love to share some of this and learn more about the story through you, because you know the background details that I have a hard time accessing. So thank you. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. It would be an honor and pleasure to basically chat with you. I think I have seen information on your great grandfathers, basically, documents about the driver. And it's really interesting, especially when I was in Washington, D.C., like there were some, I met some people by chance that had so many connections in different levels to this, in a way, diasporic community in Tehran could be one of the sources, because you can't basically trace their lineage to the people who worked for the embassies. For instance, there was this French lady, I forgot his name, who taught French at to people to women at Nasser Shah Haram, and after I'm married to sort of another person, another basically foreign resident in Iran, and then she ended up, being thrown in a well. So there's so many information about that lady, and and there's no basically, with all these documents, it's still very no one, including the Iranian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, could figure out what happened, which source of power or foreigners, whatever religious, could hurt that woman. So definitely I met, the great, basically the grandson of that lady. So it's really fascinating, because as I said, this diasporic community also had a lot of connections, and they married into each other. So meeting them accidentally by chance is absolutely amazing and informative. So yes, I mean, I've done also many interviews with people in Iran who were involved with especially culture or politics. We interviewed people with the Tudeh party, for instance, Muhammad Ali Amoui, and also many theater directors, actors, ordinary residents who live there, and basically, for instance, I interviewed Dr. Allah, who for a short time lived in their basically state garden next to the German embassy. And so this is all, this all happens very much by chance, because even getting connected to some of these people in Iran is very challenging. For instance, being able to interview, actors like Dariush Asad Zadeh, or I had done a lot. Actually, I'm forgetting a lot of names now. But generally, yes, they're very informative, and I absolutely love to do that more.
Great. Yes, oral history in the making. This is wonderful. Thank you for this intervention, Karen. And I hope you two do continue the conversation. My next hand, or the next person who would like to ask a question, is our very own Shabnam. Shabnam Rahimi Golkhande, please.
Ida John, so good to see you. And as Leila, I'm also lucky to know your previous work, and I actually know this work. So I'm going to ask you a question about a little bit of a previous life of this. What is going on with the digital database? Because this was the vision, right? You had a grand vision for this, and I'm wondering what's going on with that grand vision.
Yeah, the grand. I mean, after really a couple of years of trying to basically present the digital archive project to various people or institutions, which was really time consuming. I decided to drop the big public history project and use the archive for myself and for my research. This was definitely what Dr. Tawakkoli had advocated from the beginning. If you're collecting the material with, with all these challenges, I think it's best for you to use them yourself before, giving public access to them, which is really a different project. But the foundation is there. So maybe in 10 years.
Lovely. Thank you.
Do I have any more takers for questions to our speaker before we relieve her of our incessant interest? I think it's time to thank you very much for this fascinating talk. I learned a lot. I thought it was amazing. You have such amazing material, a wonderful story to tell, also in terms of method and archival research, really impressive, and social history, and so much that we don't get enough of. So I really salute you on this. I wish you the best. We'll be looking for your book and more talks on this. Please tell us more. So thank you again. Please join me, everyone. Are you getting a lot of claps in thanking Ida Meftahi again? And just as a reminder that our last talk in the series is next month in December. So please look out for it, where we will learn about Persian inscriptions from India. But thank you again, Ida, and everyone. Happy rest of the day, happy evening to those of us in Europe. Thank you.